начала мониторинга, и самое первое выступление — это о настроениях о настроениях белорусских домохозяйств. Расскажет Виолетта Панасевич.
Добрый день. Да, сегодня я, как обычно, расскажу о настроениях и ожиданиях белорусских домохозяйств. Мы будем говорить о первом квартале 2025 года. Опрос проводился в феврале 2025. Давайте сразу начнем с методологии, с того, на чем базируется данный анализ. В качестве основы мы используем онлайн-опрос, который проводился с 31 января по 16 февраля 2025 года. В нем, как обычно, представлены взрослые горожане, и выборка соответствует структуре генеральной совокупности по полу, региону и возрасту. Все как обычно. Ну и давайте начнем с доходов. В этом квартале о снижении своих доходов сообщили около 25% респондентов. В целом, эта доля колеблется на этом же уровне последние несколько кварталов. Можно сказать, что мы вышли на плато. Основная причина сокращения доходов — это, как обычно, рост цен. Об этом сообщили половина из тех, у кого снижаются доходы. Следующие две важные причины, которые постоянно конкурируют между собой за второе место, это сокращение заказов или клиентов и изменение курса рубля к иностранной валюте. Если мы посчитаем долю респондентов, у которых сокращается доход без учета влияния курса, то эта доля сокращается до 22% респондентов. А если мы посчитаем долю, на которую не влияют ни рост цен, ни изменение курса, то эта доля сокращается до 18%. И среди этих респондентов больше всего о сокращении доходов сообщали люди, которые проживают в Витебской области, как обычно, люди с изначально низким доходом. И также, как мы видим, из причин сокращения доходов об этом часто говорят предприниматели и самозанятые. А также в этом квартале появились квалифицированные рабочие, такие как водители и строители, которые тоже сообщали о сокращении доходов. Если мы спросим у этой четверти респондентов, как же они справляются с падением доходов, то в этой волне сплошной оптимизм. Стали меньше экономить на досуге, меньше экономить на еде, реже использовать сбережения и реже откладывать крупные покупки. Немного увеличилась доля тех, кто реже покупает одежду или покупает более дешевую.
Delaying their purchases. They started buying cheaper clothing, but this was not a significant change. Let's dwell on the labor market. For many quarters for the last few years, we have seen the situation when the share of people who reported jobless was minimum, but those who reported some of their acquaintances to become jobless was quite impressive. This quarter, we can see that this is close to the lower margin of this indicator. In Q1 2025, the share of those who lost their jobs was about 3%, and speaking of their acquaintances, it was about 12%. This is an indicator that there is a labor market deficit for many quarters in a row. The share of respondents reporting shortage of labor in their sector has been 50 to 60%. In this survey wave, this is 56%. It's interesting that, again, people from Vitebsk and Minsk oblasts are in this cohort, and also people from towns with population of less than 100,000, and also labor shortages have been reported with the income of 1,200 to 1,500 rubles per month, and those who operate machinery and materials. And also these are the representatives of state-owned enterprises, and it's evident that the leaders of organizations report labor shortages. And now let's discuss the Consumer Confidence Index. We have 5 components. The first one is about the economic situation in the country. It's fully optimistic. Belarusian respondents judge the economic situation in the country better and better. 26% of respondents say that they believe that the economic situation has improved compared to a year ago, and the same share of respondents say that the situation deteriorated. 34% respondents say that there were no significant changes. Speaking of optimism, and future projections, about 20% say that the situation will improve, and only 19% say that it will deteriorate. As always, there's quite a high share of those who have difficulty answering this question. The next two indicators in the index are about the financial standing of their families. And here we can see that the positive trend is not that clear, but it is there. And we still see that the majority of respondents report that their financial standing has not changed, and 23% say that it got better a bit. At the same time, the share of those who say that their financial standing deteriorated is 29%. Now, regarding the future prospects, then again, Belarusian respondents believe that their financial standing will improve as well as in their families. And the last element is the attitude to large purchases. Again, we can see the positive trend, but it is not as clear as with the economic situation in the country. 23% of respondents believe that right now is a good time for large purchases. 42% say that the pros and cons are not evident, and more than 20% believe that right now is a good time for saving, 5% more than in the previous survey. And based on these five components, we can build the consumer confidence index based on the economic situation in the country, financial standing in the family, and attitude to large purchases. And based on the graph, it seems that soon this graph will have no enough space to show all the optimism of Belarusians. In this quarter, the consumer confidence index was 2% in Belarus, and the latest data from Rostat were for November 2024, last quarter of last year. And here the indicator started deteriorating. It goes down, and the Belarusian index continues growing. We can also compare this indicator with the EU countries, and the majority of the European countries have not seen significant changes in the quarter. The index was minus 12.6, and now it is minus 13.5, and the Belarusian index has grown from 0.4% to 3. And Lithuania has stayed in the same area, and also Malta and Macedonia are in the positive zone of the index. We calculate this index without one indicator of the financial standing of the country if compared to last year. And the key component in the index that made it negative was the attitude to the economic situation in the country. The evaluation of the economic situation in the country compared to last year. Previously, the gap between the economic reality and the financial standing was quite large. Previously, about 25% of respondents used to say that the financial standing of their families was bad, and 57% would say that the situation and the economy of Belarus was bad. Right now, this gap is much shorter. 12% say that their financial standing deteriorated, and 21% report that the economic situation of the country deteriorated, and 45% believe that the economic situation in the country is average. Let's dwell on savings and spendings. We have not seen significant changes in the dynamics. We can also see that 50% or half of respondents say that they started spending more than half a year ago, and half a year ago, 50% of them say that they would spend more, and the share of those who started saving more, it has been fluctuating, and we have not seen significant changes in the savings. 36% of respondents do not save at all, which is less than a year ago, which is a good trend. 31% say that they started saving less. In the same quarter, we decided to check whether respondents changed their savings behavior. No, they still prefer, in the meantime, to save in Belarusian rubles under their pillow and in the bank deposits. And usually they prefer dollars and euros a bit in deposits. And speaking of desired savings, all of them want to have real estate in Belarus, but this is hardly implemented. And they want to spend more in US dollars and euros. Other foreign currencies do not stand out. Chinese yuan is not there, and the Russian ruble is presented just a bit in their preferences. And in this survey wave, we decided to ask a very general question on how Belarusian respondents judge the key partners of Belarus in the meantime. The question was, what are the key economic partners of Belarus? And the majority of the respondents said Russia and China. If we ask them to choose only one economic partner, that would be Russia in 89% of cases. Speaking of what areas or directions are most promising from Belarus, Belarusians say that, or 54% say that it should be China, then followed by Russia, and then followed by European Union countries. 27% Belarusian respondents believe that Belarus is not in economic relations with Europe. At the same time, if we just dive deeper, if we ask the respondents, what is the market of your company? The majority of their companies work for the Belarusian market, and then they export to Russia, and other countries are not really present in their list. And we decided to ask an unusual question. We wanted to find out whether Belarusians buy Chinese cars, and we asked the respondents, and 11% of respondents say that they believe that Belarusians do not buy Chinese cars. But the other reasons why they would buy Chinese cars are as follows. First, and one of the key ones is low price, reported by 32% of respondents. No more other options in the market, reported by 31%. It's not the top one reason, but one of the key reasons. Then good price and quality ratio, and then better lending terms than for other cars, and such reasons as finding parts easier than for other cars. It was reported only by 13% of respondents. So, conclusions. The Consumer Confidence Index has consolidated itself in the positive zone. Belarusian respondents actively spend and save less actively. However, we see that the share of saving respondents grows, and we can see the plateau. 25% of respondents report reduction in their income, and the key economic partner of Belarus is Russia for the majority of Belarusian respondents. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Violeta. I would like to remind you that you can ask questions in the chat in Zoom and in YouTube. And I pass the floor to Dmitry Kruk, who will dwell on the macroeconomic situation and the key trends. Thank you, Olga. Hello, everyone. Let me show you my presentation. It's going to appear on your screens in a minute. Let's start with a brief overview with the key trends of what happened, the key factors in Q4 2024. What was the end of the last year? The key news was the slowdown in output that was reported in Q3 2024. In Q4 became a stagnation. there was some growth, but it was close to zero. So in the short-term perspective, we can say that the GDP has not changed if we compare with the previous quarter. I mean, seasonally adjusted. At that, domestic demand continued growing very rapidly. And here, the key element that we speak about, and this has been seen for the last 2 years, the acceleration in salaries, which accelerates household consumption. This factor persists. However, there are some signals of slowing salaries growth, but still, salaries continue growing at a high pace. For the last 2 years, we have been witnessing salaries growth, and there's a new factor, the growth in investment demand. I would say that this is a new loop of investment demand because we have not seen such a clear trend as in case with household spending. So it is just like a spiral. And there's another thing or news for the economics in foreign trade. Today we can only judge prices, and the volumes can be judged only with a delay through the official statistics. But when we look at prices, we can say that imports and exports lowered. And in physical terms, I'm going to demonstrate this, and we can see the corresponding gap. So in brief, the trends in foreign trade in the second half year were much worse than in the first half year. So there was the quality deterioration. Now, speaking of the weights, what drags the output in and out. Speaking of Q4, the number of factors that tow the output to the bottom is what still supports the output. On the right-hand side, this is what supports the output. These are the background factors already mentioned that have been on the agenda for the last 2 years. And the last news are the turbulences in external demand. And there's an explanation to the outburst. I can see the background desire in the sectors of productions that still have demand for their produce, but face the shortage of their production capacity to replenish their production capacity. And second, administrative stimulation. When they are pushed to ensure a new investment cycle or spur. So I don't know whether this is implementable and doable or not is a question for 2025. On the other hand, among other factors that dragged it to the bottom, it was the list of foreign trade factors that deteriorated exports, and imports lowered, but still it was high, and this can be classified as excessive demand for imports in overheated economy. And there's another gradually growing new trend, and I think that Anatoly will dwell on this, is the forced weakening of the monetary stimuli amid a divergence of monetary policy in Russia and Belarus. And right now, let's see the graphs and figures. We can start with a little joke. Can you see a blue bar in the last observation of Q4? No, but it is there because it is very close to the zero level, so it is there. So we can say that the positive growth was there, but it was very close to zero. If we look at the last 1.5 to 2 years, if we look at the trends, then in Q1 and Q2 in 2024, it was like an anomaly, and we can see a gradual fading out of the output. This is the metaphor to describe that uh, there are reasons to say that the prerequisites are for the slowing down of growth, which we can observe. This is the growth in Q1 in 2024 was a historical deviation. This is not what is a regular thing. Right now is the regular thing rather than what we had in Q1 and Q2 2024. If we look at the prospects, these are the levels. Let me get back to the previous slide. Traditionally, I will explain blue bars is the growth quarter to quarter, seasonally adjusted. This is the, at the moment, speed of the economy, indicating the last impulses. The yellow line are the annual growth rates, and we can see that the blue bars drag the yellow line below. And if we compare 2 quarters in 2023 and 2024, we can see that the growth was going down, and the midterm perspective, if we look at this through the optics of the 5-year period, we do not see this trend, but we believe that in the long-term perspective, it fluctuates in the range of 0 to 2%. Right now, it is close to the middle, and the negative trend observed today will be deteriorating the situation. Now, let's look at it through the long-term perspective. In 2024, the output peaked, exceeded its previous peak of 2021, and in Q4 there was this ceiling, and the output has not changed. It stayed at the very same level. These negative trends, if we look at the output dynamics through the optics of quality, and if we evaluate return on capital, proxy return on capital, this is the return on investment, and labor productivity, this indicates the maximum return on investment. Return on investment is yellow, and labor productivity is red. So we can see these are legitimate things. Reducing return on investment indicates that there are no prerequisites for large investments. So the economy does not have the shortage of investment in terms of generating GDP growth, and we do not see anything similar to that in the labor productivity. And we can have this long-term release expectations and facts for the long-term perspective. It is still valid to ask a question how Belarus lived through the sanctions season, because Belarus continues operating under sanctions. The green line is a hypothetical scenario without wars and war and the sanctions. And the actual curve is the red line. So we can see that without the war and the sanctions, we would have a 1.5% average annual growth. So we can extrapolate this 1.5% of average annual growth from the moment of the war outbreak. And we can see that we are still below these business as usual trajectory. So under better conditions, we would feel better, we would be higher if compared to what we have today. Even if we consider this a very modest 1.5% average annual growth projection. And there's another international perspective. We should have a look at the update. Here we can see the comparison or the ratio or the real welfare or well-being. This is GDP per capita in the purchasing power parity, and we match this with the similar indicators in the Central Europe and Baltic countries, 14 countries. This is the average indicator taken for these countries, and we can compare the situation in Belarus with them. So this is the percentage of the well-being of Belarusians if compared to the average well-being of the 14 European countries, citizens of Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Slovakia, etc. So 2024 and the growth in 2024 allowed to roll back and step away from the losses that we had in 2020 through to 2022. But in the long-term perspective, we can see that this is a very low level if compared to neighbors, and Belarus is still a country that lags behind. So the growth in 2024 was just an illusion. We just changed our ranking in this a low perspective, and let's have a look at the trends that I have announced. In this slide, you can see GDP from the viewpoint of how GDP was built based on net foreign demand and domestic demand. Blue line is GDP, red line is domestic demand, and yellow is net external demand. The optimal scenario is when all the lines align, like in 2021, in 2018, the situation was favorable. When domestic demand skyrockets, this indicates that other demands will deteriorate. More inputs will be required. When these lines go in different directions, this means that there is the foreign position deteriorates, especially if you have no money to finance this. And this is a clear indication that we overheat domestic economy elements in order to ensure foreign economic balance. And this domestic component supports this situation. There's nothing new. Starting from 2023, we have been stating that rapid household consumption growth happens. And why? Because this is supported by real salaries growth, which is presented by the red line, which exceeds all possible wise and non-wise explanations, and there's a shortage of labor, and there are regional trends for labor shortage. And we can say that despite the fact that this deteriorates the financial standing of many firms, but still salaries continue growing and growing fast. However, it was not so fast in Q4, but still, the pace of this growth is rapid, and this fuels domestic consumption optimism, which is bad. Certainly, for individuals, growing salaries are good, and economists do not want to reap the people, but economists alarm when they see that salaries grow too fast.
От своих фундаментальных параметров.
Economists alarm the society when they can see a large gap between salaries grow and the reality. And today we can say that the salaries shall be matched with labor productivity. If we can see that labor costs, real labor costs grow, then this is a signal that there is a growing gap between labor productivity and salaries dynamics, and this means that salaries are not supported by productivity. Therefore, we can see that in 2023 and in 2024, rapid salaries growth was undermining the economy. And this can be clearly seen that enterprises do not sell that much as they pay to their workers, and they carry the burden of excessively high labor costs. The novelty of Q4 is as follows. Amid long-term growing consumption, we can see the input of the investment, which is compared to the consumption of households. In previous quarters, the red bar was the leading one. The red bar is the final consumption, and yellow bars start growing. This is investment. Still, we do not see any rapid growth in terms of investment. Yes, there is some growth in investment if compared to other quarters, but if we look at it through the optics of a midterm perspective, then investments get back to their standard level. So we cannot be speaking about any spurt in investment growth. The government projected growing investments in 2025, and if this materializes, then we will say that if we compare this to previous seasons, Belarus would see growing investments. And now, speaking of the foreign trade indicators, if we rely on the data that we have, the values of imports and exports are as follows. In Q4, we can see decreasing both imports and exports deteriorated more than imports, and this undermined the lower position. And if we consider the input of the physical volumes, then we can say that there is a problem, that there is a hit on the side of demand. And I can assume that the output decreases because of the limited export capacity. Imports and exports in terms of petroleum products are combined. If we cannot export enough of petroleum products, we cannot export them to the same degree as in case of imports. At the very level of imports remains very high, which is a proof that demand for imports in the overheated economy persists. If we look at the physical volume dynamics that we can drag from the national accounts statistics for Q4, which say that this is just an estimate, then we can see a larger gap, and this is one of the key threats that are on the table. This is not behind the horizon, but this is a deteriorating situation in the balance of foreign trade. This is not only a problem for macroeconomic stability because it is difficult to finance deficit, and we can say that in the absolute terms, in the second half year, this is about $750 million. If we continue the same track, then this is going to be the burden that will not be something unbearable percentage-wise for the economy. But considering limited sources of financing to finance foreign trade deficit, this can be a significant problem. But it is more important that this hits exports by limiting demand. We can skip this for the sake of time. So I would like to say conclusions. The risks and flaws of 2024 are still valid, and they carry over into 2025. We could see this in the previous Belarus Economy Monitors. The majority of these items are still valid in 2025. First of all, this is labor shortage, this is the shortage of production capacity, and the macroeconomic imbalances. And there are other reasons that have appeared and that have been seen on the horizon. First of all, this is cooling of the Russian economy. In autumn 2024, we mentioned that as the possible scenario with some doubtful signals. Today, we can state that the Russian economy cools down, slows down. This is clearly seen. And the second thing that we have seen in the last months, this is the new trend that the Belarusian ruble started strengthening towards the Russian ruble, and therefore, well, it started weakening to the Russian ruble. It is a wrong wording on the slide. And this happens because the Russian ruble gained its losses back that it had in November and December to the US dollar. So today, Russian ruble is stronger if compared to the US dollar. And for the Belarusian National Bank, it is better to recover itself towards the Russian ruble. But this opens an opportunity that we had because of the Russian inflation. Higher prices in Russia is a significant risk that will impact Belarus in 2025. And also, we can see other signals from the global economy. These are a few other impacts. We can see new trends in trade policy and the economic changes generate a new economic impulse. And in many countries, we can see already in January that inflationary expectations grew, and inflation in December last year and January this year was growing. So what we expected as the end of the fight for decreasing inflation, and this continues, and this may change the economic situation. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Dmitry. Right now, we are passing the floor to Anatoly Kharitonchik, who will speak about the balance of the economy and forecast for 2025, and then we will have the Q&A session. Thank you, Olga. Hello, everyone. Indeed, today I am going to be dwelling on the balance of the Belarusian economy. I will discuss the expectations for 2025. In late 2024, early 2025, Belarusian economy was in an unbalanced, overheated state, and it was deteriorating the situation in the economy, shortage of labor, and high inflation in the areas where price controls do not get, at least directly, and that the economic policy has not demonstrated a clear aiming to fight accumulated macroeconomic imbalances in 2025, since rapid output growth becomes challenging amid shortage of production capacity and labor, the growth of Belarusian GDP will slow down to 1.5 2%. Pro-inflationary pressure will be elevated and foreign trade will see deficit. Despite the fact that the Belarusian economy did not grow in the second half year of 2024, growth or output volume was high, close to its historic peak. You can see it on the right-hand side on the chart. And GDP was 1.5% higher than its balanced value in Q4, which means that the output gap remained positive, which means that the Belarusian economy was in the status of overheating. This economy overheating is significant. If we look at the left-hand chart, then we can see that the scale of overheating and excessive demand slowed down in the second half year of 2024. It was because of slower exports and a slow growth of the potential of the Belarusian economy amid slow deterioration in investment. And the key limitation for the economic growth is a labor shortage. This problem was even more acute in Q4. The level of unemployment decreased if compared to the previous quarter, seasonally adjusted, and this is a bit less than 3% of labor. There were less than 9 of tenths of an unemployed per one vacancy, and a labor shortage on one hand limited the growth of the potential of the Belarusian economy. On the other hand, it stimulated employers to increase salaries rapidly, and the salaries in Q4 in real terms were almost 10% higher than the balanced level. You can see it on the left-hand side. Therefore, these dynamics of salaries translated into elevated consumer demand or excessive consumption demand, and at the same time, excessive demand in the economy, and on the other hand, limited exports and full production capacity utilization and limited opportunities in the Russian market, and profits turned into a limited deficit. However, this deficit in 2024 was significant, 1.7% of GDP per year and about 4% of GDP on a quarterly basis in the second half year. For Belarus, it would be known to have a negative balance of foreign trade within half a percentage of GDP to a little profit of about 1% of GDP. At that, it is likely that this norm has shifted to small profit after 2022 because of the restrained access to foreign financing. On the left-hand side, you can see that the deficit and foreign trade exceeded the norm, and this is a significant imbalance in foreign trade. And as said, there are systemic factors that led to moderate deficit. Its extensive expansion is probably based on a number of temporary events and shocks, including lower volumes of oil refinery and lower exports of petroleum products and spurt in demand in Q4, and this happened before the June sanctions of the EU were made effective, and starting from October, Russia changed its duties for cars, which reflected on Belarus later. Therefore, there was a deficit on the foreign currency market in Belarus, which was seen in the record-breaking from 2010 net purchase of foreign currency by firms. At that, this net purchase of foreign currency by businesses was compensated by the net sale of foreign currency by households. This camouflaging of the purchase of foreign currency by firms by households selling foreign currency, this could not be offsetting for the macroeconomic policy. And in the last months, this compensation was not full, and the foreign currency market operated in the conditions of net demand. While its size was small and the foreign exchange rate of the Belarusian ruble was quite stable, if we look at the foreign currencies basket, at that in the real effective terms, the Belarusian ruble remained closer to its equilibrium level, even a bit being a bit undervalued within 1%, and the impact of foreign exchange rate on inflation in late 2024, in early 2025, was close to neutral. At that, in general, the pro-inflationary pressure was elevated, mostly because of the excessive demand in the economy and the overheated labor market, which pushed costs of producers higher, especially labor costs. This manifested in the fact that from September last year, base inflation elevated to 6 to 7%, and it is still there. This is the annualized price growth per month, seasonally adjusted, which indicates the immediate price impulse. On the other hand, non-base inflation on the left-hand side was in this period close to zero. Non-base inflation includes non-regulated prices and prices for vegetables and fruits. Regulated prices were elevated very slowly in late 2024, in early 2025. The annual growth was 4%, which was minimum in 21st century. And in terms of pricing for vegetables and fruits, Belarus restrained prices and banned exports of some fruits and vegetables. And the conservative approach of the government to controlling prices is because the authorities plan to reach or not to significantly deviate from the target inflation by leveraging the administrative resource. And this restraining of inflation by non-market measures brought us to a larger gap in the price dynamics for individual components of the consumer basket. When goods, especially non-foods, were getting more expensive very slowly, if compared to previous seasons under very strict price controls, then non-regulated services grew in price dozens of times, in dozens of percentage. And we can see that there is an imbalance in the Belarusian economy in price growth, and the level of prices for non-regulated services in January, more than 8% was higher than the level of prices for non-foods, which indicates a price disbalance and an inflationary overhang. The inflationary pressure is estimated as 10% inflation, but not 5% inflation that we can de facto see. The National Bank of Belarus in Q4 and in early 2025 did not take monetary policy measures despite any excessive risks and overheated economy estimated by the National Bank as 2% of GDP, potentially that the interbank rate increased in late 2024, in early 2025, because the deficit of liquidity in the banking system lowered, because the National Bank sold foreign currency in the market, and it took the Belarusian rubles amid the growing demand for foreign currency debt. This rate was lower than the refinancing rate, and it was lower than the optimal level, which means that the monetary policy remained moderately loose. However, the size of the monetary stimuli lowered if compared to last year. Despite this inertia of the National Bank, interest rates on loans and deposits grew in Q4. And this was due to the factors non-impacted by the monetary policy. Mostly, these were interest rates in Russia. Therefore, interest rates on Belarusian ruble deposits and loans were higher than nominal. However, this excessive elevation was insignificant, and this does not affect the lending activity. Therefore, financing of the economy and the monetary mass grew in Q4 and in early 2025, and only household lending indicated some slowdown, but it's hard to say whether this is the trend for chilling this or this is just a temporary adjustment. The money supply continued growing rapidly, just like in 2024, and last year money supply grew by 17% and by 28% in rubles. And these deviations of the actual growth of money supply from the indicators or targets of the National Bank indicate that the National Bank is institutionally weak and it adheres to no policy. The National Bank hardly responded to overheating of the economy and inflationary risks. This does not prevent emission of rubles through the government budget and was not adhering to the inflation targets strongly. So the National Bank weakened itself if compared to the administrative authorities, and the National Bank purchased bonds, government bonds and other bonds. It purchased bonds for more than 3 billion Belarusian rubles. These resources were used to sustain a higher level of government budget expenditures, and in the consolidated budget, based on the available public information, grew by 5 to 6% in real terms, which means price adjustments. This is higher than 4% GDP growth, and this indicates that the budgetary policy is stimulating. However, the very government budget could be executed with the profit based on the indirect information. This profit was about 1% of GDP in the consolidated budget, or even more, if we consider the profit of the Social Protection Fund of Belarus. However, this profit is cyclic, and mostly this is supported by significant growth in tax returns amid declining foreign demand and reduced inputs from the Russian budget, which stands for about 5% of the government budget. So we can call the budget stable, but the ability of the government to finance the announced scope of financing and funding and to repay debts strongly depends on interoperability of transfers. This, then the National Bank may get back to the auctions to regulate liquidity in the banking system, and that it is more likely that the National Bank will leverage other instruments. First of all, increasing the standard risk values, which limit the interest rates, and also they may go for increasing the reserves requirements in foreign currency and strengthening some prudential instruments like limiting the lending load. At that, the intrabank interest rate will continue growing in 2025, but in real terms, it will be below its neutral level. Belarusian ruble interests for loans and deposits will grow because of the higher interest rates in Russia, and they will be a bit higher than their neutral levels, and they will create hardly restraining monetary conditions for the interest rates. This may slow down financing and money supply volumes. However, this pace will stay relatively high because this will not restrain this significantly. And as said, the government is willing to expand the budgetary expenditures and to continue directive lending. As a result, the economy will continue operating in the conditions of excessive demand. GDP will be higher than its balanced level, and the output gap will be positive. You will see this on the right-hand side. At the same time, GDP growth will drop from 4% last year to 1.5% or up to 2% maximum this year because production capacity load is full. There's not enough investment to expand labor productivity and expand production capacity, and there's shortage of labor, and monetary stimuli will manifest in less and less returns in the volume of production, but this will sustain higher consumer demand and volume of imports. An additional constraining effect on the output of Belarus and on the exports of Belarusian goods will be provided by the expected slowdown of economic growth in Russia and growing competition in the Russian market. In these conditions, foreign trade will remain deficit in 2025, and in the base scenario, this will be about 2% of GDP. I mean, the deficit of the foreign trade deficit annually. And this will create pressures on the exchange rate of the Belarusian ruble, which may lower. And the base scenario says that the Belarusian ruble may get cheaper by 4 to 6% in the basket of foreign currencies. If the dynamics of exports slow down and if the output slows, then salaries will also slow down. Last year, salaries grew by 13%, and in 2025, real wage growth is expected to be 5 to 7%. Labor market will continue to operate in the state of labor shortage, and it will be difficult to address this challenge considering the current demographic trends. Due to that, pro-inflationary factors will continue dominating in 2025. First of all, this will be the excessive domestic demand, growing labor costs, and price growth in Russia, which will not be compensated by the strengthening of the Belarusian ruble to the Russian ruble. We can see it on the right-hand side. This is the contribution of exchange rate and base inflation in Belarus. If the authorities start transforming the price controls in order to weaken price controls, then inflation will grow from 5.2% this year to 6 to 8%. From 5.2% year to year in 2024 to 6 and even up to 8% year to year in 2025. Therefore, conclusions are as follows. The degree of uncertainty of the forecast extremely high. Significant threats remain in the economy due to sanctions. There can be the reduction in the growth of Russia's GDP, there's a significant weakening of the dynamics of the world trade and the economy that are coming. At the same time, we can expect softer sanctions limitations, and we can expect that Russia's economic growth may remain about 2.5% in 2025. This will create more favorable conditions for increased investment and increasing labor productivity, and may temporarily support Belarus's GDP growth above 3%. And the last thing that I would like to mark is to mention that again, the authorities' target settings for 2025 for GDP growth of 4.1% and inflation within 5% are not agreed upon. The Belarusian economy entered this year being overheated and in an unbalanced economy state is about 2%, considering the resource, technological, and institutional limitations. The National Bank estimates the balanced growth of GDP at about 2% a year, which can be found in its public materials on inflation if you look for this. Therefore, if the growth of the Russian economy slows down to 1 or 2%, then the only source to ensure this GDP growth target will be to 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 develop a domestic demand through excessive budgetary and monetary stimuli. This will bring us to extend uh, demand and overheating of the economy at a level of 4 to 5% of potential GDP. And this will mean a high inflationary pressure of foreign currency and foreign trade if compared to the base scenario. If the government goes for weakening the price controls to support demand, then inflation will be 10% or even higher. If price controls remain strong under large-scale stimulation, then the financial standing of enterprises will get worse, and non-repayment risks will grow, as well as the risks of economic downturn and midterm perspective. Even if this scenario materializes with a weakening excessive external demand and excessive stimulation of domestic demand, I would not expect a hyperinflation and devaluation of the Belarusian ruble like it was in 2011. Right now, the Belarusian ruble exchange rate is fluctuating. It is close to the equilibrium level, and the Belarusian National Bank does not have targets on the foreign exchange rate. It just absorbs the shocks and ensures this low-scale volatility. And if domestic demand is used, then this will not mean inflation higher than 10% and the weakening of the Belarusian ruble by more than 10% if compared to the foreign currencies basket. This is it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Anatoly. We are waiting for questions in the chat, and we will read out loud the questions asked when people are registered. So the question is, everything changes rapidly in the world, and when did you make this forecast of the Belarusian economy? We did it as of today. We did it based on the current information. The survey was from January 31st through to February 16th, 2025. So the information from our colleagues is based on the information that was generated a bit earlier. And there's a question about the Moser oil refinery. In 2024, the authorities would say that oil refinery was good, and last week the oil refinery said that they did not break even. So can anybody answer the question, what was the real situation and whether they lied? the problems started prior to the storm in summer 2024. If we look at the statistics of two refineries in Novopolotsk and in Mostar, and neither of the oil refineries broke even in 2024. This was due to higher costs associated with procuring Russian oil, which got more expensive if compared to 2023. And the second important factor was the lowering discount for Urals versus to Brent. In 2023, this discount was significant, and Belarusian oil refineries bought Urals from Russia at a low price. Then they would reprocess it, refine it, and then they would sell their petroleum products to the global markets with a discount to Brent, but the discount was not that significant. Therefore, it was about 1.8 billion US dollars per year in 2022 and 2023. In 2024, Urals continued costing less, but this profit was lower. Roughly, it could go down by $700 or $800 million. So it's evident that previously that had compensated excessive costs associated with logistics, etc. And today, this is not the reason. So that significantly changed the deteriorated the financial standing of oil refineries. And the summer storm even generated additional losses to the oil refinery, but we can see in the dynamics of industrial output that they have been recovering. And in January 2025, we can see, based on the data, that at least in Gomel Oblast, processing industries gradually grow. There's another question about the decision of the authorities to let mayors of towns to appoint CEOs of private companies. Will this affect private businesses? Let me answer this. This is a philosophical question, and this issue is full of populism. I don't know how they're going to implement this. Maybe anything is possible in Belarus, but I don't think that this will cause any significant changes. And why? Because the private businesses are still operating in Belarus perfectly understand the rules of the game, the situation. They cannot leave Belarus. They simply follow these rules. And I think that for the last 2 years, anybody could forecast that would happen. So this will not change the Belarusian market. It will not turn it upside down. And I think that we can counterbalance this. Yesterday there was the meeting at the highest level of the government of Belarus. They said that full-fledged support will be provided to private businesses. So they try to balance. On the one hand, they put the business on the stables. On the other hand, they speak about creating terms and conditions for them, and they want to tie the private sector to the government. So this is the logic. And again, I don't think this will surprise businesses, because all the businesses are aware what the situation is for them. And the question is whether the Belarusian businesses and labor have been substituted by Russia or Russians. I don't have figures at hand, but let me dwell on this. We can hardly see relocated Belarusian businesses. If we remove some political motivations for relocations, those businesses that were connected to foreign markets relocated, who had issues with wire transfers and toxicity of being from Belarus. So it's hard to believe that these businesses will be replaced by any Russian firms in Belarus. There were foreign businesses in Belarus who left, and certainly their places have been occupied by Russian firms, including marketplaces, logistics, and other firms of the kind. And the last question is whether Anatoly or Dmitry can say anything about the January outcomes published today. Yes, we can. Billstat says that the GDP grew by 3.7% in January 2025 versus January 2024. This was below expectations, and I introduced you the base projection, but this was because of the warm January. Therefore, added value in the energy sector did not grow, but dropped by 9% if compared to last year. And if we make a seasonal adjustment, then we can say that GDP in January dropped if compared to December 2024. And if we remove monthly fluctuations, then we can say that this is close to the level of May or June last year. So this stays close to the peak. Processing industries remained in good shape in January 2025, but mostly in Minsk and in Minsk Oblast and in Gomel Oblast. I would dare to tie this to the temporary recovery of exports to Russia, first of all. So machine building, not only cars, and not cars at all, but probably machine building and metallurgy have improved. And in January 2025, there was a budget impulse in Russia. So they financed the government budget spending. If they normalize their spending, then the Belarusian production industries will also slow down. In January, again, according to preliminary estimates, if we make seasonal adjustment, then we can see that the consumer demand could have deteriorated. I would not make fast conclusions. This is similar to a small adjustment after 2 months of accelerated growth in November and December, but it is very likely that the National Bank will respond to a significant growth in consumer lending, and the standard risk values will be increased shortly, and we can expect that the lending dynamics will deteriorate, as well as real salary growth and consumer activity will continue being high, but it will slow down gradually. These are the key ideas that I have in my mind. Thank you. I do not see any other questions. Thank you all presenters. Thank you all participants, and see you soon in the future.